everyone, you're listening to The Progressive American. I'm your host, Connor Kelly. Welcome to the show. Today we are discussing the recent attack on Nancy Pelosi's home, Charlie Kirk's defense of the assailant, Elon Musk's abuse of Twitter, and my response to Kevin Ferris over his coverage of the Mar-a-Lago raid. With that out of the way, let's get into the news. It could only be described as a sign of the degradation of American politics and the political system at large. Speaker Nancy Pelosi's house was breached on October 28th by a pro-Maga activist who was carrying a hammer and who demanded to know where she was. Thankfully, the Speaker of the House was not present, but unfortunately her husband, 82-year-old Paul Pelosi, was, and he was at the mercy of this man who threatened him with a hammer and threatened to tie him up. What followed would lead to Mr. Pelosi fleeing to his bathroom to call 911 to ask for help against this assailant and intruder. By the time police arrived 8 minutes later, they found Mr. Pelosi fighting with his assailant, trying to get a hold of the hammer that was being used to threaten him and hold him as a hostage. Somewhere along the way, the instigator ended up getting a hold of his hammer and hitting Mr. Pelosi over the head, knocking him unconscious and forcing him to the hospital where he had to have surgery for a skull fracture. Speaker Pelosi, by contrast, was safe in Washington, D.C., where she was not threatened by anybody, but it is worth noting that she was the target of the attack. Upon his arrest and interrogation, the instigator, David DePape, stated that he wanted to break Nancy Pelosi's legs if she lied to him about her intentions as leader of the Democratic Party, which he considered the center of lies in American politics. He further elaborated that if he could not get to Speaker Pelosi at that moment, he would wait for her to arrive and then attack her and take her hostage. The idea being of breaking Speaker Pelosi's legs would mean that he would be able to show her as a weak figure because she would then have to be wheelchaired in the United States House of Representatives. Now, thankfully, DePape was charged with federal assault on the immediate family member of a federal official and attempted kidnapping of a federal official. Those charges will likely lead to him serving a very long prison sentence. But the reason I bring this up is because not only was this an attack on the second-in-line person for the presidency, and God forbid, say, the president and the vice president were to die, Speaker Pelosi would end up being the heir to the presidency until the next election. But it's more than that. This represents a form of revelation, I would say. What we see with this assault is somebody believing that the Democratic Party and those involved with it are not only illegitimate as Americans, but they're illegitimate as human beings, to the point that they're willing to break their kneecaps. Like, imagine that for a second. Imagine, getting into the mind of somebody who thinks like that. Say what you will about all the, partisan garbage that we see every now and then. Imagine being so blinded by partisan hatred that you feel the need to go after your fellow Americans, and then try and break into their home, beat their husband over the head, an 82-year-old man, with a hammer to the point where he has to go into surgery. Thank God he's okay. He's gotten out of surgery and he's expected to make a full recovery. But, imagine the amount of hatred you have to do that. And then consider the larger scale of rhetoric we see online, in politics today, the amount of vitriol and just disgusting rhetoric we see from some members of the Republican Party and really people online in general. And when I look at that and when I consider that, to me this becomes evidence of a larger problem with the rhetoric in our public policy apparatus. And by that I mean how we as members of the United States public deal with rhetoric, how we treat our fellow citizens. And let's be clear here, I am not both sides in this. There has been study after study that shows right-wing extremism, right-wing terrorist violence is the overwhelming majority of that political violence. And it's gotten worse over time. Since January 6th, there have been increased threats to members of the House of Representatives and to the Senate to the point where members have had to request funds from the House of Representatives to create defenses at their own homes, and some of them have not been able to. Now, I bring this up again because a lot of the discussion surrounding Nancy Pelosi's home and the breaching of that home has spiraled into insane conspiracy theories. Some people have argued that this is, and I'm not even kidding when I say this, an example of a gay lovers quarrel gone bad because somebody came up with the idea that both of them were found in their underpants, which, if you read the actual police report, that's not true. It's been completely debunked by the police department. There is no evidence for it whatsoever. But it also led to, for a time, the hashtag Paul Pelosi is gay trending on Twitter for a very long time. And it led to people engaging in what could only be described as mocking an old man being assaulted and nearly murdered. Hell, even Marjorie Taylor Greene, a member of the United States House of Representatives and one of the forefront fundraisers for the Republican Party, went out of her way to take a dig at Paul Pelosi, arguing that if he had a gun, and instead of supporting gun control, he would have been fine. Never mind the fact that the assailant came into his bedroom while he was sleeping, and then threatened him, and then assaulted him. But she insisted that this was a perfect time to attack an 82-year-old man who was beaten over the head with a hammer. And I bring this up again and again, not just as a term of like vitriolic rhetoric being a problem, but in terms of this being an act of terrorism. This was a person who went out of his way and has repeated this, mind you. He's not just like saying this in interrogation. He's doubled down and said, no, I am a supporter of Maga. I am against the Democratic Party. They are the greatest liars, etc., etc. He's not somebody who has hidden what he intended to do. I bring this up because it's an example of far-right terroristic violence that, despite being condemned by some members of like the Democratic Party, majority of Democrats, if not all of them, and some members of like establishment Republicans, has gone largely like treated as a partisan exercise. Anybody who's ever like perused the Twitter profiles of MAGA Republican Twitter will see large amounts of people who are actively going out of their way to defend them. And that's something that I have not seen in a while. Yes, you have your people who will defend the, January 6th insurrection. They will argue, some of the people who were there to peacefully protest or whatever. But to defend or outright make jokes and conspiracies about an 82-year-old man being beaten over the head with a hammer is a level I did not expect. And maybe it's just because some part of me is naive about the current state of online politics and politics in the United States in general. But this seems like a watershed moment, where the Republican Party and the more extreme members of it are not only willing to express themselves in such a way that they can literally make fun of an attempted murder and assassination of one of the most powerful people in American politics, but they can also pay little attention to the fact that this act was a threat to national security. And I mean that. And for those who are wondering what I mean by that, if you look at the presidential succession list, Speaker Pelosi, again, is second in line if the president dies. So if President Biden were to die today, God forbid that ever happens, and Kamala Harris somehow managed to pass away, resign, or whatever, Speaker Pelosi would be president. So what we're seeing here is a threat created by a terrorist against the life of somebody who is, for all intents and purposes, not only the leader of one of the two chambers of one of the most important branches in the United States government, but who is also in line to protect the executive branch of our government, who is very close, in the event of a horrible tragedy, to commanding our armed forces. Her life was threatened. And yet you had members of the Republican Party joking about that. And this tracks over into the next story that will follow from here, because it's not just Republican politicians, it's Republican podcasters, commentators, people who, for all intents and purposes, make their living, their selves, in commentary, repeating this garbage. So, for the sake of this story and the next, I want my audience to consider if the roles were reversed. If the roles were reversed and the Republicans were in charge of the House, and a Democrat walked in to the Speaker's home when the Speaker wasn't there and demanded to know where the Speaker was, And then when the person actively attempted to protect themselves from the assailant, then the assailant beat them over the head with a hammer, what would be the reaction? Do you honestly believe that Democrats would be joking about that? Because recently, in Illinois at least, Republican gubernatorial candidate Darren Bailey received horrible death threats, and not only did the Illinois Speaker of the House condemn it, in no uncertain terms, there was no qualifications on it, but gubernatorial candidate J.B. Pritzker explicitly condemned it as completely and utterly unacceptable. It was near universal condemnation. If you go through the Instagram pages, the campaign pages of multiple Democratic politicians in the state of Illinois right now, you will see them sharing or posting the condemnation posted by Speaker Chris Welch right now. That is a distinct difference. What we have right now is a partisan standard that is not being treated with the level of severity that it needs to be. Because the Republican Party, some of them did condemn this, but not enough did. And if we are going to fully understand the distinction between these two parties in their relationship to the body politic, this incident needs to be an example of that. In similar news, Turning Point USA founder and president Charlie Kirk apparently feels that the man who decided to attack Speaker Pelosi's home could be considered a, quote, midterm hero. The comments were on his podcast, The Charlie Kirk Show, as he was attempting to establish some strange connection between some of the issues with the bail system in the city of Chicago and the way in which Speaker Pelosi's assailant and her husband's assailant are being treated in the justice system.
I mean, I'm looking at Politico.com, I'm looking at the New York Times, I'm looking at all these places, and there's a little bit of mention here. For example, Politico says top Republicans reject any link between GOP rhetoric and Paul Pelosi assault. Of course you should reject any link. Why is the Republican Party, why is the conservative movement to blame for gay schizophrenic nudists that are hemp jewelry makers breaking into somebody's home, or maybe not breaking into somebody's home? Why are we to blame for that exactly? And why is he still in jail? Why has he not been bailed out? By the way, if some amazing patriot out there in San Francisco or the Bay Area wants to really be a midterm hero, someone should go and bail this guy out. I bet his bail's like $30,000 or $40,000. Bail him out and then go ask him some questions. I wonder what his bail is. They're going after him with attempted murder, political assassination, all this sort of stuff. I'm not qualifying it. I think it's awful. It's not right. But why is it that in Chicago you're able to commit murder and be out the next day? Why is it that you're able to trespass, second-degree murder, arson, threat of public official, cashless bail? This happens all over San Francisco, but if you go after the Pelosi's, oh, you're let out immediately.
Now, aside from the false equivalency between attacking the second in line for the presidency in the line of succession and someone being improperly released in the city of Chicago because of the failed jurisdiction and decision-making of a judge, what does this actually say about Charlie Kirk and his rhetoric? He states that he is not qualifying the harm that was done to an 82-year-old man in an assault, but then simultaneously attempts to argue and insinuate that somebody should bail this guy out. Why? When I first saw this clip, when I first saw the Media Matters clip being spread about this, the first thing I thought of is, how does he not see this as a contradiction in logic? He simultaneously argues that the Republican Party bears no responsibility for the resulting assault against the Pelosi household, says it is ridiculous to assume or even suggest that the Republican Party's rhetoric contributed to this, despite the fact that one of their largest fundraisers, Marjorie Taylor Greene, has previously asserted that Speaker Pelosi has committed treason and therefore should be executed, and then simultaneously goes out and says, by the way, it would be heroic if somebody bailed this guy out, and that maybe, just maybe, he's being treated with undue process. Undue force by the judicial system. Think about that for a moment. If somebody attempted to bash your head in with a hammer, and someone came along and said, I'm not endorsing what happened to you, but let's talk about all the things I think you've done wrong. And maybe, just maybe, if somebody came along and helped the guy who beat you over the head with a hammer, that person might be heroic. Maybe ask him a few questions. What do you think that person's actual intentions are? I get a lot of flack sometimes when I talk about conservatives, when I critique their actions, both scripted and unscripted. And I'm always kind of told, hey, you're misunderstanding their intentions. You're not addressing their specific statements. And firstly, I think that's completely untrue. But secondly, I think it's important to remember that just because someone says something does not mean that that is exactly what they mean. And I think that's no more evident than with Charlie Kirk. Because this is a guy who will say one thing and then contradict himself in the next breath and then call it a political argument that is just being ignored by the left. If there is anything I could say about this, it is this incident, these few seconds of statements by Charlie Kirk that is precisely the reason I don't 100% take conservatives at their word. Not in all cases. Some conservatives do put an honest front forward, and there will be a video out where I think the person I'm critiquing is doing their due diligence, at least in terms of what they think is true, and you will hear that after the break. But when it comes to conservatives like Charlie Kirk, particularly ones who have a major platform, this is the reason I'm skeptical of them. Because when they go out there and they talk about something so severe to the body politic in America, they talk about it in such a way that it is so conspiratorial, so distrustful, that it becomes impossible to reach out to them and say, hey, that's logically inconsistent. Hey, that's promoting political violence against really the nation and its national security. Like, I'm not even a fan of Nancy Pelosi. I hate having to defend these establishment Democrats. I hate having to talk about Benghazi because I have to defend Hillary Clinton, because a lot of the arguments presented in that case are not accurate. The same goes for this. I'm not looking to make Pelosi a victim because, quite frankly, I would much rather have someone younger, more progressive replace her. But when it comes to protecting political and social institutions, I have no choice because of what the right is doing. Like, I would love nothing more than to be able to say Speaker Pelosi is not the person I'm siding with. Because, truth be told, she's not representative of what I would like to see in government. I would much rather see a more dynamic government that is willing to fight, much more willing to hold the Republican Party accountable, and less likely to just play into this civility politics that really doesn't go anywhere. But, at the end of the day, when it comes to the security of the nation, the domestic tranquility of the country as a whole, looking at the political violence wielded against her and her family serves as a reminder that even if you don't agree with Speaker Pelosi, there has to be a restraining effort. And unfortunately, restraint seems to be lacking among the right. In more chaotic news, Elon Musk has officially bought Twitter, and the results have been less than stellar. Musk's purchase of Twitter came after months of fighting with its leadership about the conditions of the purchase, as well as him attempting to back out once it became clear that he could not 100% get what he wanted, much less realize how he would be able to monitor it. Unfortunately for Musk, Twitter threatened to sue him unless he went through the deal that he initially proposed, and as a result, he ended up spending $44 billion, which is most likely more than Twitter is actually worth, in order to purchase the site. Not long after he purchased Twitter, he tweeted, quote, "The bird is free." And the quote tweets surrounding that tweet were filled with so many slurs and threats by white nationalists that it could only be described as an example of why Twitter's moderation programs before Musk were so necessary. In fact, analyses show that after Twitter was purchased by Musk, the amount of N-word usage increased by 500%. Now, I'm not just talking about this because it's something that's catchy. Musk has always been kind of easy to mock. He's always kind of seen himself as a visionary. But the reason I'm talking about this now is because even though Musk's original purchase caused an uproar in Twitter in terms of the amount of hate groups that popped up and the amount of spam, misgendering, threats of violence, etc., it's gotten worse. Because Musk has apparently gone on a warpath to purge Twitter of its employees, including a significant portion of its moderation team, several days before the midterm elections are supposed to be completed. Now, mind you, that is a major issue, not just in terms of like hate groups and racist rhetoric, but also in terms of misinformation and foreign government interference, meaning that there is less infrastructure in Twitter to examine inauthentic behavior on the site meant to influence elections through propaganda, misinformation, conspiracy theories, and threats of violence. So what Musk has done in his so-called pursuit of free speech has actually been to threaten the dignity and reason of the American political system within social media. Remember, democracy isn't just an opinion-based thing. It depends upon reason of the people, good information, educated people. And I don't just mean like educated scholastically. I mean people who are aware of their surroundings. Musk, who describes himself as a free speech absolutist, has consistently argued that Twitter's moderation censors conservatives, but because he's pretty much fired most of the moderation team and is actively upsetting many of the basic norms on Twitter, Twitter is likely to become more of a cesspool. I wrote about this a while back, but after Musk basically purchased the site, people like Matt Walsh of the Daily Wire actively went out of their way to encourage people to misgender, harass, and go after trans activists whom he sees as predators, groomers, etc., even though that's, for all intents and purposes, not even close to true. And I bring this up not just because I think Elon Musk is somebody who readily takes advantage of the public's funds in terms of his infrastructure plans, which don't do anything for the public, and many times they're just a way to distract from other more successful programs like rail. He's also somebody who's taken the grift of supposed intellectual martyrdom and free speech absolutism to its most idiotic phases, to the point where he spent more money on a site that he has no idea how to regulate than it was actually worth. And now you've got people from 4chan and other far-right forums actively spamming slurs every single day, trying to find people who they disagree with and trying to drive them off the platform, or spreading Holocaust denial. That one I've seen a couple times already, to the point where Twitter may very well lose its advertisers and its ability to fund itself. In fact, Musk has been tweeting about how he's been losing advertisers, supposedly because of woke activists, ignoring the fact that, the N-word popped up 500% since he bought the site, and that might be driving, advertisers away. But also the fact that Musk keeps blaming other people for his moderating decisions. For example, he wants to go and take the verification system, which is the blue check mark behind the usernames of every single user that's verified, to basically pay for it. So if you want to get the check mark to verify that you are in fact who you claim you are, you have to pay $8 a month. Now previously, verification was still pretty sloppy. You had to prove you were a big profile person, you could apply, and they would determine whether or not you would be verified. And generally speaking, it was very arbitrary. I won't lie, like old Twitter was not great, even with like their moderation program. But with this, it's not so much that you're verifying your identity, it's more you are paying to have prestige on the site, because the blue check mark was kind of associated with establishment, well-known figures, both in social life, but also in political life. And that is yet again another illustrative thing about Musk's control. He has no idea what he's doing. And this is where I think it's really important to start talking about the rhetoric of so-called free speech absolutists. When people talk about liberating social media for conservatives, liberating social media for people to speak their minds, they very rarely actually talk about what that entails. In a private social media environment like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, etc., there is a certain element of profit that plays a role in how these companies handle themselves. They're free, for you to use because you are the product that is being sold. They send you ads on the site, they get paid, you get to stay on the site and be able to express yourself. But in doing so, these companies also depend on their ability to make their platforms as friendly to these brands that they're advertising as possible. And if they can't do that, they have to find other ways to fund themselves. And because Musk, who thinks he's a big free speech absolutist, doesn't understand the distinction between freedom of association and censorship, has now unleashed all the prejudices of the internet onto one of the major social media companies in the United States and on the globe, he's now bleeding advertisers. And it may very well be the reason that Twitter dies. Now, personally, I hope that doesn't happen, but if it does, it'll serve as a reminder that TOS, terms of service, are incredibly important to establishing a very public marketplace for people to express themselves without having to pay for it. Twitter was, like many other social media companies, a place where people could express themselves. And make no mistake, it was a hell site even before Musk came along. There were plenty of horrible things posted on that site. But what this shows, even with the previous problems beforehand, is that you cannot have a free speech absolutist mentality when you're dealing with a private social media company. And as much as Musk would like to think that he's going to come up on top of this and say, yes, I liberated Twitter, the fact of the matter is he's probably going to be the reason it falls and is probably going to end up becoming a symbol of the failure of so-called free speech absolutism in social media. We're going to take a real quick break, but I will be back and we'll go over my recent response to Kevin Ferris, host of the Speechless podcast. Don't go anywhere. Hello everyone, I hope you are doing well. Today's video will be a bit different, as it is a response to someone I know personally and someone I grew up with through our time as members of the same Boy Scout troop. In this video, I will be responding to conservative podcaster Kevin Ferris over his coverage of the raid on Mar-a-Lago. For those unfamiliar with Ferris, he is the host of the Speechless podcast, a conservative show hosted by the equally conservative radio platform Cities 92.9. Which is based out of Bloomington Normal. He's the current president of Turning Point USA's Illinois State University chapter and has been a guest on shows such as The Paul Garcia Show, another young conservative podcast. Ferris's content is largely critical of liberals, progressives, and other such content creators in the political sphere, which isn't too surprising. He is a conservative after all. But there is an element of his content that presents itself as open to the so-called marketplace of ideas. One need only look at some of his guest appearances and you can get a sense of where he stands in the larger rhetorical sphere of online politics.
I'd say building here, and I really do appreciate being able to come on. You've had a lot of my good friends at Cities 92.9 on, and I'm really proud to be able to say I will now be on the Paul Garcia show.
Oh, man.
I'm so excited.
You are too kind. I was just on your show a second ago. It was a great time. I've learned a lot from you. You're very smart. You're very articulate. You're very conservative. And on this show, you know, I've had people from the left and on the right on my show, and we've talked, and it's been great conversations. I agree with some points on both sides of the aisle, actually. People know that I kind of lean conservative for sure, but across different issues, it varies. I want to ask you, and also I should tell the people, how old are you?
I'm 21.
21 years old. Wow, you're destined for really great things because, as I said, you're very intelligent, you're very articulate, you know what you're doing when it comes to radio, when it comes to speaking. You've spoken at many events, and you've done so very well. All that said, enough flattery. Tell us, what does it mean to be a conservative in your mind?
That's a big question, Paul, because I think it can mean different things to different people. I mean, at a very base level, I think that there's the issues that really bind every conservative together, and that's usually limited government and allowing yourself to keep more of the money you earn. So those kind of go hand in hand because you got limited government, meaning there's less government in your life. And if there's going to be less government, it doesn't need as much funding, so then we can lower our taxation. And that's pretty much what can bind every conservative, bring every conservative together. Most of the time, you usually have support for the police and law and order because we want to be able to protect the things that we've worked so hard to build. But then there's also the issues that kind of can be more contended in the conservative realm. I mean, gay marriage is one that's still kind of debated among conservatives. I know it seems somewhat settled by society, somewhat. I mean, now there's all this talk regarding the right to privacy and what if Obergefell could actually be overturned. That's a debate to be had, but gay marriage is one that a lot of conservatives can still fight on a bit. Abortion, most are mainly pro-life, but there's still kind of some of those questions is, should there be exceptions? At what point should an abortion exception be? So what does it mean to be conservative? What it really means is to be pro-America at the end of the day. Because there are all these issues, and there are the few that can bind everyone, but not all conservatives are the same. Mm-hmm. Like, it's about perspective, really. I mean, when you go into a paint shop, Paul, you could ask for red. Let's say red means conservative, red means Republican, whatever. There's going to be a bunch of different shades of red that they're going to show you.
Insofar as Ferris describes his view of it, conservatism is about limited government and, to some extent, an understanding of the diversity of thought within his given movement. In other words, conservatism is a diverse movement with a variety of perspectives to be considered and how best to protect people's properties, business, etc. There are, of course, more elements to his description than those he brought up, but generally speaking, those are the themes that remain constant among conservatives at large, according to Ferris. Such thought is probably one of the many reasons cities chose him for their platform, as it hosts a wide variety of conservative and sometimes reactionary political commentators such as Sean Hannity, Officer Tatum, and Ben Shapiro, to name a few. It isn't hard to see why such a view of conservatism might be appealing to some in his local community and to the platforms that want to prevent that kind of face for a conservative movement. But more than just examining the local conservative podcast scene, Ferris's politics and coverage demonstrate a major flaw within the conservative media atmosphere. That issue being the distrust that Ferris and other conservatives hold in modern media and other mainstream institutions being taken as self-justified, and unfortunately, it is used as a framing device that is rarely discarded. From that distrust, a larger narrative of persecution can be established, and that is no more evident than in how Ferris responded to the search of Mar-a-Lago. On August 8, 2022, the Federal Bureau of Investigation searched the former president's home at Mar-a-Lago and seized multiple classified documents along with presidential records that former President Trump had been repeatedly asked to return to the federal government under several statutes. More specifically, the FBI was seizing these documents in an attempt to enforce the Presidential Records Act of 1973, which according to the National Archives requires that, quote, any records created or received by the president as part of his constitutional, statutory, or ceremonial duties are the property of the United States government, unquote. In other words, any documents held by the president that are part of his or her constitutional and legal duties as president are the federal government's property, and can't be withheld by former presidents without some extenuating circumstance. Sadly for Trump, those circumstances don't apply here. According to an August 12th report by the New York Times, the Department of Justice asserted in their warrant that Title 18, subsections 1519 and 2071 were the basis of their search, with the first subsection addressing the attempt to conceal, destroy, or otherwise alter documents with, quote, intent to impede, obstruct, or influence the investigation or proper administration of any matter within the jurisdiction of any department or agency of the United States, unquote. Meaning that on the first level of statutory authority, the FBI had reason to believe that Trump was attempting to or was willing to conceal the documents he had in his possession, which were already illegally in his possession. When examining these facts in the larger context of the raid in legalese, it would not be hard to think that the basis of the raid was a genuine concern about the proper ownership of government materials and the law's ability to check former executives in their ability to claim said documents under the law. By contrast, consider how Ferris inserts partisanship into his analysis and asserts that, much like Liz Cheney's concession speech, the investigation into Donald Trump's holding of federal documents is an element of political theater, along with the January 6th committee.
And we are back with Speechless on Cities 92.9. Thank you guys for joining me this Saturday afternoon. As always, please text or call in at 09-451-9299. I have our text line open now, and I want to know what you guys think. Should Liz Cheney have won? Is she right? I don't think so. I don't think so, but if I'm wrong, tell me. Tell me why I'm wrong. I want to hear it. Because we have a weird sector, we have a weird division in our Republican Party right now. Where, and I don't understand why we have this. I mean, we were all very united under Trump. 97% of, during the majority of Trump's stay in office, 97% of Republicans supported Donald J. Trump. And then January 6th comes along, and January 6th, no, there shouldn't a breaching of the Capitol and everything, but they aren't asking the right questions in the January 6th committee. I would have no problem with January 6th committee if it was actually nonpartisan. If it was 100% actually nonpartisan, because if it was nonpartisan, we'd be asking questions like, why did Nancy Pelosi deny extra police at the Capitol on that day? Why did she deny that? Was it set up so that they knew something like this would happen? Why were there buses of people that kind of just showed up out of nowhere that seemed to be escorted by police to go into the Capitol? Huh? Why is that? Nobody's asking those questions in our January 6th committee, and that's how we know that this is political theater. That is how we know that this is political theater. It's absolutely absurd. We have a government that is wasting our money on disgusting productions. Another way that they've wasted our money is actually, and I wasn't able to cover this last week because I was not here, and I'm sorry about that. But the FBI raid on Trump's home. It's insane. This is insane that the FBI raided, unprecedented that the FBI raided Trump's home. I know you guys have probably heard a lot about this, a lot about the FBI raid, but it is, I really could not, it's unfathomable to me that this would even happen, that they occupied his home when he wasn't even there. That's a big thing that I felt like not enough people were talking about either. Everybody was just talking about how crazy it was, period. I think it's even, the worst part about it is the fact that nobody was even there. None of the residents were even there to be like, to look over the warrant, it seems planned that way, that they wouldn't have to like knock on the door and have Trump there, and for them to basically just occupy his entire home and go through all of their things without anybody even being able to watch over and say, hey, like, why are you looking through that or anything like that? So that alone is crazy. I also do have a clip here. I thought this was insane to me that we have these intelligence agencies that are acting unchecked. We have the FBI, we have the DOJ, they're bureaucracies. They're not elected. They aren't elected. They are honest, and I've said this before on this show. I think our intelligence agencies could quite possibly, they are a bigger threat to us than radical progressivism ever could be. Because they don't operate even on a political agenda or to hold power. They have an established power through our government, and they're not elected. So they're not beholden to anybody but those that write their paychecks. So they're beholden to those in power.
With regard to the claims about January 6th, there is a lot of gish gallop and not all of it will be addressed here, but for the sake of brevity and accuracy, it should be noted that when there was a request by Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund for security, it was not delayed or vetoed by the Speaker's office. In testimony before the United States Senate, House Sergeant-at-Arms Paul Irving noted that he only alerted congressional leadership once Sund had told him on January 6th that the situation was deteriorating and they might need more guards. It is further worth noting that this officer did not wait for congressional input before he tried to get help. Pelosi did not, as Ferris would like to believe, attempt to block support for Capitol security. But that is neither here nor there. With regard to the raid itself, while Trump is the first president to have his property searched, the search was not engaging in any particular malfeasance as he suggests. During the raid, lawyers for Trump were alerted to the warrant's presence, and though sealed, the warrant would be released to the public for consideration on August 12th, more than 8 days before Ferris released his podcast response to the raid. It should not be surprising that Trump's property was searched when he was not present. Remember, Trump was suspected of attempting to conceal documents from investigators and had a previous history of destroying documents even when he was in office. As far back as May of 2021, the National Archives and Records Administration had been trying to get documents back from Trump, who illegally held onto the property. It wasn't until January of 2022 that 15 boxes were retrieved by the archives, but even then, not all the documents were returned. Which is why an investigation involving the Department of Justice was opened up into Trump's handling of the documents as early as April of 2022. This was not new. And while it is understandable to be skeptical of those in the intelligence and law enforcement bureaucracies of the country, it is critical to provide actual context for what was happening and why. The raid into Trump's home was the product of nearly a year of conflict and demands for Trump to follow the explicit letter of the law. and he failed to do so. Moving forward, Ferris continues, integrating the reaction by liberal celebrities with the raid itself, seeming to suggest that the raid and the reaction from figures like Stephen Colbert were indicative of a larger societal problem among liberals, and that said problem creates a threat to the safety of all citizens.
But that's the way it is. Anyways, I went off on a bit of a tangent. Going back to the Trump raid, the left was reacting to this in a very, very strange way, considering kind of how scary it is that the FBI raided a former president's home, of which he wasn't even at when they raided it. But here's Stephen Colbert when he heard this news. This scared me, honestly. Here's Stephen Colbert.
Be hot outside, but in here, it's Christmas.
It's Christmas?
Because yesterday, we all got the present we wanted. FBI agents raided Mar-a-Lago. Oh, wow.
He's cheering and like kissing to the crowd about this. And what is that giggle?
That's the most beautiful sentence America has ever produced.
Oh my God. He says that's the most beautiful sentence America has ever produced. No. Aren't you scared that the FBI, Trump was right. He said it when he was in office. They don't want me. They want you. I'm just in the way. That's what Trump said. And that's really what it is. I mean, there were people that were just peacefully protesting on January 6th that got FBI agents showing up to their house. It's absurd. It is absurd how the left acts like this. Do they not realize that this could happen to them as well? I was on Paul Garcia's show. You guys should all go. I know Paul was on my show about 2 weeks ago, right around the same time I went on his show as well. And him and I talked about like kind of what socialists want, and why I'm not for that, but where I could see socialist ideology playing a part in society. I know this sounds really weird, but let me explain. Because I am not a socialist by any means. But what I explained on Paul's show is that socialists and socialist ideology pushes power and economy decisions made from the top down in government. So we have so to a socialist, it'd be good to have a large amount of power from our federal government and less as you go down. I'm the opposite. I think that we should have our local governments having much more control and power than our federal government, and it should go bottom up. And so what I'm getting to when it comes to the FBI raid with this is that to a socialist, yes, this would be something to celebrate because it would mean that from our federal government and our federal agencies, they have a large amount of unchecked power. This is what they want. But it's still weird to me that it doesn't scare them because, well, actually, no, it's not weird to me as I think about it even just right now on air. It's not weird to me because they know that those people in power, those agencies will only go after us because of who writes their paychecks. A lot of questions I was hearing on social media and from people when the FBI raid happened is why weren't they going? Why is Hunter Biden? Why is he not being raided? There's an abundance of evidence to say that he should be raided. Why isn't? Why weren't the Clintons raided like this for the emails lost and everything? Why aren't all these other people? Well, it's because those are the people that are running the show. Those are your producers of this political theater. Those are the producers. They're the ones saying lights, camera, action. I also had a lot of questions like when it comes to the Trump raid, what were they actually looking for? Because it seemed very vague for them to just say classified documents. In fact, Rep. Adam Kinzinger, I'm sorry for any of you out there who is your current rep, don't worry, it'll change soon, commented on the calls for the Mar-a-Lago affidavit to be released to the public, and he said some information should not be released if it puts lives at risk. He also stated that some documents in the Mar-a-Lago raid may be, quote, so classified they cannot be revealed. He appeared on CNN on Friday to discuss the FBI search of former President Donald Trump's Florida residence, during which 11 sets of classified documents were seized. According to court records, in response, Trump and his allies have called for the affidavit used in the search to be released to the public. Now, here's the thing, is for them to say classified documents, that really doesn't make sense because technically, when a president is in office, he has unilateral authority to declassify any document he wants. He doesn't have to go through, he doesn't have to sign a paper. There's no trail to say what is classified and what is not classified. He actually under the President Trump White House, he had a running rule that because oftentimes he would go back to the residence and take some of his work back to his residence in the East Wing. And there was a rule that everybody just kind of knew that if he took a document out of the West Wing into the East Wing, it was automatically therefore declassified. He didn't have to say anything. He didn't have to let anybody know. That was just kind of the rule. So maybe people want to change the rules on what makes something classified or declassified, but that's not the argument you can have in this case, because Trump technically could say all these documents that were taken from him were at one point declassified by him, and so thus declassified now. That's exactly what he could do. There is no legal standing to say that they were seizing classified documents, because technically he has a legal loophole to just say that all of these were declassified anyways.
The reality is much more complicated than what Ferris presents. There was an additional layer to the search, namely the issue of declassification, which, while broad in its implied power for the president, is not without limits, and still requires a process through which the president must go. As explained by the Congressional Research Service, there are codes and executive orders that restrict and influence the declassification of sensitive materials. Under U.S. Code Title 32, subsection 2000.11, current statutory law primarily gives original classification authority to the agency that created the document. The president may, at times, declassify information, and he does have broad authority to do so, but he does have to explain specifics about the documents he's releasing and has to consider the implications of those documents. He can't wave his hands and just claim declassification, and considering it was later revealed that the FBI seized documents relating to nuclear secrets, that is probably a good thing. Not only that, but the issue of classified documents is primarily based off the DOJ raising the possibility of the Espionage Act being applied to Trump's mishandling of classified materials, but even without the documents being classified, Trump would still be in legal jeopardy because of Sections 2071 and 1519 of Title 18, as well as the Presidential Records Act. The classification is just the icing on the cake. Ferris finishes his argument after being confronted by a texter who calls him a liar, using a statement by Trump to argue that corruption motivated the raid and insinuate that America is becoming a so-called third world country. To Ferris, the raid serves only to stain Trump, and that the media has a vested interest in smearing Trump through this raid, and that it is backfiring both politically and strategically.
And we're back here with Speechless on Cities 92.9. I'm your host, Cav. Great to be talking to you guys this Saturday afternoon from 2 to 3. You know, I actually did receive a text during the break from a heckler. Feel free to text or call in at 309-451-9299. I want to know what you guys have to say. A lot of what we've been talking today is about the political theater we've been seeing with Liz Cheney, the January 6th committee, and now this FBI raid of President Trump's home. I got a text in that said, "That is a lie." Okay. What did I say? Texter, please tell me what I said that was a lie. And maybe like just like actually try to refute what I'm saying, because I can't. I want to be told if I'm wrong about something, tell me why I'm wrong. I could be wrong, but I need you to be able to tell me what I said that was wrong and why it was wrong, because that's how we have discussion. That's how discussion works. But getting back to, until I get that, again, anybody else, if you have any thoughts, text or call in at 309-451-9299. That's the number, 309-451-9299. Love to hear what you guys got to say. If you call in, I'll bring you right on air and we can have a conversation right here. But we're talking about the FBI Trump raid, which is just absolutely absurd. I don't know if you guys had a chance to read the statement by Donald Trump a little over a week ago when this raid was conducted. The statement by Donald J. Trump, 45th President of the United States, reads, "These are dark times for our nation as my beautiful home, Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida, is currently under siege, raided, and occupied by a large group of FBI agents. Nothing like this has ever happened to a president of the United States before. After working and cooperating with the relevant government agencies, the unannounced raid on my home was not necessary or appropriate. It is a prosecutorial misconduct, the weaponization of the justice system, and an attack by radical left Democrats who desperately don't want me to run for president in 2024, especially based on recent polls, and who will likewise do anything to stop Republicans and conservatives in the upcoming midterm elections. Such an assault could only take place in broken third world countries. Sadly, America has now become one of those countries, corrupt at a level not seen before. They even broke into my safe. What is the difference between this and Watergate, where operatives broke into the Democratic National Committee? Here in reverse, Democrats broke into the home of the 45th president of the United States. He goes on with a little bit more, asking about all of his the times he's been persecuted politically for Russia, the impeachments, everything like that, and then asking how was Hillary allowed to delete her emails and not even be subpoenaed by Congress. So much and he talks about America's bureaucratic corruption, which is something I love to talk about on this show, is the bureaucratic corruption. There are a few things I want to point out, though, when it comes to the statement, and a few questions I have for you listeners out there. The first being, Trump says that this is an assault that could only take place in a broken third world country. Do you think we're on our way to that? Or do you think we're in that? Are we a broken third world country now because of our corrupt government? I don't know. I really don't know. And I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about that. Are we in that? There's another thing that Donald J. Trump says in this statement, is he says that these Democrats desperately don't want me to run for president in 2024. You know, I've been wishy-washy. Well, not even wishy-washy. I've been pretty clear I don't think Donald Trump should run in 2024. But I do think, and this is unconfirmed, this is just my opinion, my analysis of the situation, I would not be surprised if this raid was done not because of any suspected criminal activity, not because of any type of actual justice. I think this was a form of political theater that was so that the news could run headlines of Donald J. Trump has home raided for potential criminal activity. There doesn't need to be anything that comes out of this. There doesn't need to be any charges. We may never even get to see the documents regarding what the purpose of this raid actually was, because I don't think there actually was anything of significance. I think that the purpose of this raid was so that they could run headlines that say Donald Trump had home raided. Because what this does is those that are not necessarily politically active and informed, because for whatever reason, they'll see that and think, well, he must be a criminal then, because criminals have their homes raided by the FBI. I think that's the purpose of it, but I think that it's having a backwards effect. I think it's acting differently than the Democrats had and our justice system had intended. In fact, actually, Truth Social, Donald Trump's social media platform, rised in popularity significantly. Apparently, it had 550% more downloads after the raid. More and more people are flocking towards Trump. And Trump isn't going to stand down and just let this happen. According to this, there's actually claims that this could be pushing Trump to announce his run in 2024 sooner. According to I'm reading the article right here. According to the New York Post, there's an increasingly widely held belief among Trump's friends and hangers on that the energy and outrage generated by the federal search is the perfect springboard for an announcement in the month's midterm elections in November. Michael Caputo, a former Assistant Secretary of Public Affairs in the Department of Health and Human Services, he said, in the days after the raid, we saw all fundraising records broken. This isn't my first rodeo. I know what the signs look like. Since the raid, Trump's Political Action Committee has raked in millions of dollars in new fundraising. Our Save America Political Action Committee had reported more than $100 million cash on hand before the raid. So they're raking in money because of this. People are PO'd. People are not happy about what the government is doing right now, and they're flocking towards Trump. They think Trump is the guy to do this. Do you think Trump is our best bet in 2024? You think he is? Text or call in at 309-451-9299. I want to know, because I'm more of a DeSantis guy, I got to be honest. I think Trump did amazing things for this country, but I think DeSantis is more polished, has less to go after him for, and is a quality candidate. He's right now the governor of Florida. I think he could be America's governor, the president of the United States. I think he'd be the best bet, but Trump has a lot of momentum right now because of this raid. According to Huffington Post, Trump actually is, this was breaking news today, Trump is threatening major motion based on the Fourth Amendment due to the FBI search. According to a post on Twitter, the Fourth Amendment will soon be filed concerning the illegal break-in of my home, Mar-a-Lago, right before the ever-important midterm elections. My rights, together with the rights of all Americans, have been violated at a level rarely seen before in our country. Remember, they even spied on my campaign. The greatest witch hunt in United States history has been going on for 6 years. To the scammers, it should not be allowed to continue. According to the Huffington Post, several legal experts scoffed at the possibility of any successful major motion by Trump based on the amendment. Former U.S. Attorney Harry stated in a Twitter post that Trump was likely referring to a motion to suppress evidence, which people do after, not before, charges are filed. And he'll surely lose, according to them. I'm interested in battle could go. I don't know. The only reason why I think that it won't, because you're suing the United States. If there's anybody who could do it, I think it is Trump.
The problem with this assertion of electoral success, aside from not being supported by public polling, which has Trump's unfavorability at 54%, is that it ignores the seriousness of the raid itself. Electoral politics, considerations of celebrity reactions, and Hail Mary legal insinuations about supposed Fourth Amendment lawsuits are no replacement for a strong and contextualized examination of legal reality. Trump was the first president in United States history to be raided. That much is true. But why he is being investigated and to what degree he plays a role in his own legal woes are factors that should have been examined from the very beginning of that podcast. With such a historic and complicated moment breaking out before the American public, it is critical that claims made by both the DOJ and those they are investigating are taken with a grain of salt and in the spirit of evidence-based consideration. Sadly, in his coverage of the search, Kevin Ferris has insisted upon partisan grievance, deference to Republican political interests, and a distrust of the media as alternatives to more nuanced coverage. While I do expect that some reply may come in the future, I do hope that reply will be more nuanced